oh my God, I love my life because of what happened after I thought it was all over.
This is Interfering Neurotic with me, Dr. Ash King, and mindfulness coach Darren Larson, where we navigate a life lived with the curses and blessings of big feelings. Plot twists are an exciting feature of our favourite stories, but can be the most harrowing experiences of our actual lives. In this episode, we reveal the major plot twists of our lives and how we survived them, the painful exercise in pushing through when life shoves us into the unknown, how to exist in the story before growth, closure, or resolution, and why resilience looks much messier, sloppier, and tear-stained than we ever expected. You're listening to Interfering Neurotic with Dr. Ash King and Darren Larson. Darren, what's been going on in your world lately?
I feel stimulated. I'll say I feel stimulated. I have all these ideas. I'm reading several good books, which I think is probably part of the problem. I'm probably reading too many things simultaneously. And everything I'm reading is sparking ideas for posts or newsletters or mindfulness exercises. So I guess one thing I'm reading that's not doing that, I'm going to share that. I don't know why, but I read a book a couple years ago called The Plot. Did we ever talk about this? It's The Plot. It's kind of this page turner, and it kind of blows my mind because did you read it?
Yes.
And it's sort of like about creative writing and fiction writing, and then the struggle to get something written, and then teaching when you can't get published. And it has all these plot twists and turns and things. And I just found it riveting, which is unusual for me right now as a fiction reader. Well, I'm reading the sequel now, and I'm finding it pretty much just as compelling. So I like that. And it doesn't make me reading that doesn't make me want to write a novel. I'm just trying to enjoy that. But it seems like everything else I get my hands on, if I read a poem or read a poet, I'm trying to write poetry. If I read about this, I'm trying to explain it over here. Does that make sense?
I'm just like that too. Yeah. I have had a little hiatus from reading books. I used to just be churning through them, be listening to audiobook at the same time as having two books on the go. And I had a few recommendations for I Who Have Never Known Men, which is a fiction book written by a French author. And I read it it's not a huge book. I read it really quickly, and it really it's kind of a dystopian book and quite a strange, mysterious and absurd situation that this woman who's kind of telling the story in a memoir type fashion explores her own experience moving through this world. And she does such a great job of speaking about things like pleasure and discomfort and meaning and purpose as someone who has never grown up and evolved in the world here as we know it. So experiencing the world in quite a foreign and abstract and confused and isolated way, because she doesn't have a lot of people to explain things to her. So I found that really, really interesting.
Wow, you have to put that in the show notes for sure. I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. I don't need anything else to read, Ash, but that sounds interesting.
I've been learning how to ride horses.
Oh yeah, how's that going?
It's going great. I really love being around horses, but I really don't like being bad at things. And I think that it's a lot when you go out to ride around the arena and there's like 8-year-old girls that are absolutely smoking you in their technique and you're just struggling to get one right straight in, without pulling your hips out. I don't know. I think that it's good for me because I do think that sometimes when I recognize something's hard that I stop doing it because I'm like, oh, well, this is one of those things that's just not meant for me. But being good at riding horses is something that I would like to be able to say about myself.
What do you think is the most satisfying part of it? If you take out the awkward, clumsy feel, what do you think that you find compelling or satisfying so far?
I definitely feel some of that co-regulation experience that a lot of equine therapists speak to. So, that the horses' heart rates are slower than ours and people have a real therapeutic experience being around horses. It's interesting though, because there's other people who are in my class that are kind of a bit more sort of anxious or scared around the horses. They obviously like love
Mm,
being there, but the sort of reaction that they tend to have that I see when they're walking around the stables or even on the horse is kind of scary. And that's fair. You know, people can injure themselves a lot on horses. They're unpredictable. The other thing that I love about riding is that I've never been a hiker or an ocean swimmer that much. I'll run in, get wet, come out. So this is one of the first
mm,
physical activities that I've gotten to
mm.
do that allows you to be out in the natural world.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was thinking it's so good to do things where we don't feel like we're good at them. And the first thing that comes to my mind when you said that was swimming. I'm not good at it. I have flashes of understanding how someone would like it more with more competence, but navigating that in between is really hard. It's so easy to stop, but I think we have to keep going.
I've been curious about runners and long distance runners for this too, because I've never been one of those. And I've always been curious about that feeling that they talk about of how it can be deeply uncomfortable, but also deeply rewarding. I know that you've done some sort of marathon
Hmm.
too.
Well, and I think that there's something about the randomness of that feeling. It's kind of like it's a really bad slot machine. The payoff doesn't happen that often, but when it happens, it's really sticky. It's really delicious. So I never chased that feeling. I was more like surprised when it happened. And it is amazing, but for me, it's not motivating enough to keep me doing something. But I'm glad I had those. I feel like I've had that with meditation too. But for some reason, I am willing to let that be random and kind of few and far between and enjoy it when it happens without getting too obsessed with it. But it's so much different to experience something like that than to read or think about it because there's something that you can't really imagine. It's something, but I bet you've had something similar. It's just a transferring of feeling just really deeply content in a heightened way. I don't know.
I think that piece about the uncertainty or unpredictability of an experience and not knowing what's coming is a good segue into our conversation, which is making peace with the plot twist and how life itself throws us curveballs, things that we weren't expecting. And we might have been chasing something in one direction and we get thrown off course, or in fact, we just pivot and take ourselves somewhere new. I think that it's one of those things that when people are in their plot twist era, it's really hard and really uncomfortable and really confusing. But it's one of those things that's kind of like a snow globe where everything gets shaken up for a while and then it can find new ground or resettle in a new way where you find yourself and your life looking completely different than it did before. How have plot twists featured in your life, Darren?
It's such a loaded. This is such a loaded question. This is such a trap. This is a trap. I have to pick one or two. I could pick a couple and then we could decide which one to go into. Do you have how many? Do you have several or do you just have a couple?
I got a couple, and I think so. I've brought this up on dates. I remember it's an interesting conversation, which is kind of like your save point in a video game. So tell me the moments in your life that you think would have been a save point, and then you kept going from there. So something significant that
Oh,
your
yeah.
life before was a life, and then save,
Oh my gosh.
and then you live on a bit more, and then there's probably another save point coming. So this is kind of how I see it.
Well, I think that, and the trick for me is to give you a high level thing because I like to go into maybe over explaining. But the first one that comes to mind is I was a piano major on a scholarship to a state college, and my whole life seemed to be leading up to this. You were going to be a, professional pianist. Um, and I almost immediately hated it for lots of reasons, but it was one of those. I feel like I sometimes I look back on the memory of that time as a movie because it was the set design and the characters and like literally I'm in this giant piano teacher's studio with books up to the ceiling in every direction and a grand piano and this woman walking around while I played the piano. But it was such a pivotal moment that turned the course of my life away from music and sent me into a tailspin for years. That's the first one that comes to mind. And then the second one is when my marriage ended because I came to terms with my sexuality, and that was a huge upheaval. And then, I feel like in some ways my life, those points along the way are so defining parts of my life. And they're also the kinds of things that especially the music one, it's so seductive to go back and imagine kind of like a sliding doors. What if, what if the teacher, the piano teacher, had explained it differently or recognized the kind of support I needed at that time? What would my life look like? And I'm at the point now where I'm glad it turned out the way it did. And it feels less and less seductive, but not entirely not seductive to imagine. Does that resonate?
Like if you got to watch a little snippet of the life you could have lived, you'd still be curious to watch it.
I think so, even though the more it feels like the people, like if I had to choose, if someone said, okay, you can do it, let's go. But the problem, like it switch over, I would watch it, I guess. But the problem of actually having taken a different direction is that it means the people, I wouldn't have the relationship. Like, right? Even if I had stuck with piano or not married my wife, I wouldn't have the people in my life who are now in my life. They just wouldn't, it's not possible for them to be there. That's the other thing. So the seductive part of it is if I imagine having stayed with it, then I imagine the best possible scenario of what a life of a musician would look like. What are the odds of that?
It's interesting because I have a similar one to you. Really, the most significant plot twist, I think, for me, I kind of had a subtle one when I went to uni and I studied media production and had an idea that I was going to work in film and television because that was always something that I was really passionate about as a teenager. And I didn't know whether I wanted to do screenwriting or be in production, but I knew that I wanted to be somewhere around storytelling. And when I started to get into the industry space, I was like, oh, no, this is not for me. And conveniently at the time, I had been playing in a covers band and I've been singing for most of my youth as a kid and as a teenager, singing lots of music theater pretty much. But I joined a cover band. We went and did some gigs at sort of pubs and clubs around Sydney. And when I decided that I didn't want to do the film and TV stuff, I just go, okay, well, how about I just sing? And so me and
Oh.
my best friend formed a band. And we did. We built the band up. We had TV appearances. We got to go around the country. I wrote my own cabaret show. And that was really the direction that I saw my life going in. We even
Ah.
started recording some original songs. So we're like, yeah, let's go and play festivals and do our own stuff. But just as that was sort of opening up, I had a vocal cord rupture, which was not so significant in that I was like, wow, this is it, I'm done. But as I kept trying to sing on it, I really kept trying to deny that it had even happened to me.
Oh.
But there was something going on inside. And it was really this tension of I used to be able to trust my body, what's going on, and then something
Oh.
different would come out that that denial ended up inflaming the condition, and it got worse and worse until I had to be effectively sat down and told you can't be singing on the gigs anymore. And I can still remember that conversation and the way that I felt and the notion that my life at that point was going to be changed forever, even if I didn't know what things looked like on the other side. So, yeah, interesting that you had a life of music presented out before you and it was
Uh-huh.
the road not taken. And I feel the same, although I feel like I didn't get a choice in the matter, which can be really frustrating sometimes when it comes to a plot twist.
It's interesting to frame it as a plot twist because as it's easier to be, I think, objective about hearing yours than to remember mine. But then I kind of, as I hear them kind of presented together, there's something that hasn't really occurred to me before, I don't think, which is I frame it as a musical story. But I wonder now at this stage in life if it's an artistic impulse, emotional artist, like there's an inspiration. I want to do something, develop a skill that would be entertaining in a putting on a show, telling a story way. And the most available to me in my situation was the piano. In a way, that impulse is still there. It's just that the piano is not the path to it
Mhm.
specifically, which is really tricky, especially when you see other people whose lives have played out. I feel like that's the sticky thing about so much social media too. Like, oh my gosh, these people who did do it or are doing it, or younger people. And I also though know I wasn't ready at the time for a different thing other than that twist. You know what I mean? It's like with the distance of with hindsight, I can see, of course, that was the right choice at that time based on who you were and what you knew and the tools you had available. Um, but when yours something like, do you remember suddenly your body, it felt different in your body to sing? Is it a tangible memory of the first time you ever became aware of it?
Yes, I remember when I started to feel it, and it's actually not something that I can feel on a sensory level, but when the notes
Uh,
come out, they don't hit the right
uh,
tone, not tone. They don't hit the right note.
yeah.
I
Wow.
can get it there, but it takes a bit of time. So basically, you have vocal cords, and one of mine is partially paralyzed. So it won't move as quickly as the other,
Wow.
which doesn't impact my speaking voice, as you can see. But when I
Yeah.
pitch something quickly, as you do when you need to sing, that's when it became an issue. And
Wow.
so it was hard to recognize at the time. But I I do love the framing of a plot twist because I think most of us like a plot twist in a book or a movie. We're like,
Right.
oh,
Right. Right.
exciting.
Right.
And yet, the experience of living it does not really promote the oh
Not
vibes,
at
does it?
all.
And I have one that's sort of, I've spoken about a lot on the podcast already, but my marriage coming to an end after 10 years and still kind of being in the mess and muck of that plot twist has been really interesting because when this happened to me with my voice a number of years ago, I didn't have any understanding of any psychological concepts. I did not have a
Mm,
really mindful or conscious relationship with my emotional world. So a lot has changed in the
mm,
interim. And I ask myself, how is it that I can show up differently in this current plot twist that's playing out in real time in a way that feels like I'm more on my own side. And I think even this language about plot twist, or you were talking about music and thinking of our lives as a song, the songs would not be interesting unless there was some sort of
right.
dynamic shifts throughout, right? And
Right.
we appreciate that when listening to music or engaging with art. But I think that it's difficult when we have to live through it.
In the arts, I think you and I come back to this a lot. I don't want to see a movie where the person wakes up and everything is fine and the day is wonderful and then they go to bed rested. It's like that's not a compelling movie. But there is something about what book was it? Had an epigraph that said Americans love a tragedy with a happy ending. I feel like it was John Irving or some book by John Irving perhaps, but that really stuck with me. And I think that when you're in the tragic part, I was just thinking, I can't imagine if you and I were having the conversation at a point in my life between my marriage ending and the relationship that I'm in now being officially underway because it was a very messy years of ambiguity and feeling like I had nobody on my side in it at all. And yet I was trying to be actively involved in my daughter's life. You know, she was a toddler. So I had a lot going on. And I don't think I could have had a conversation with you about it at that time. What I do remember is um, part of it was I know I'm supposed to move on. That there was a kind of like, I don't know. My marriage ended. I started a relationship with a man, and that man was not ready for that. And so I moved on and moved. But I didn't wish him well, and I didn't let it go. And I held on hope that it would still resolve because I thought, oh, no, no, no. We act really belong together. You don't realize it yet. Would you hurry up and realize this? Because I've got a life to live. But that was completely outside my control. To me, that's maybe the biggest plot twist of my life is navigating that long period of time in that unknown and knowing what to do with my big feel before I had any tools whatsoever for my feelings and knowing how to redirect or start over or do whatever, right? So yet now, and this is I think the theme of what keeps coming up for me today as we're talking, is it feels like one thing when it's happening, feels very different looking back on it. But at the time I was in it, there's nothing anyone could have convinced me other than the resolution I was hoping for. I remember this because I thought in other times in my life, relationships that ended or whatever, I wished the person well. Oh, go have a life, enjoy your life, do whatever. I never wished him well. And like, I never could get to the point where I hope you're happy with someone else. Never. No, I could not do that. But here's a plot twist. He's who I'm with now. I mean, so it worked out. It worked out. That's him. So it's like he came back.
Wow.
So yeah. So that's also a very dangerous story to put out into the world because sometimes I'm like and this is I think you and I have talked about this. I mean, I think maybe after my last retreat, I kept thinking the word is unlikely. My life, my memoir should be something has to have unlikely in the title because it's very unlikely that any of the things that have happened to me happened and that my life looks like it looks right now. It's very unlikely. So the same person who I never got to the point of wishing him well, we've been together, since 97
Oh my
after
God.
all that.
Can I just say that it kind of flies in the face of a lot of this, like life will work out for you once you have, let go and forgiven.
Nope. I had not let go. I didn't let go. And I would have these moments like he's going to come to his senses. He's going to we lived in different states. We didn't talk for a year and a half. And I still had this in the back of my mind. He's going to realize it. He's going to realize it.
I mean,
And then I guess I did, while I didn't emotionally give up, I started seeing someone else and that was starting to get very serious. And I thought, yeah, but I told that guy, I said, I come with a warning label. This is not resolved for me. So anybody who I date needs to know this probably won't go well. This is probably not a great long-term commitment for you. I'm just giving you the warning. If you want to play the game, take your turn, but I'm not promising anything. And it was starting to get very serious about the talk of moving in together and all these things. And then that's when I heard from Matt, reached out again. And I said, I thought about it for a while and I made a list of reasons I should or shouldn't go down this road again. And I came to the conclusion I had this very short list of why I should give it another give him another try, and pages of reasons not to do it. So I called him and I said, no, we can't. We're not gonna do that. We're not, you had a chance. And then I couldn't sleep. I did whatever. And I'm like, okay, let's see what happens. And here we are.
What is fascinating is that most of our plot twists that we came to at the beginning, the ones that we first put out there, were endings. right? That's the
Right.
first thing that came to my
Yeah.
mind, right? You say the ending of your, potential piano career, the ending of your marriage, the ending of my singing career, the ending of my marriage. And yet positive plot twists are still in there. I didn't mention me having a baby. I didn't mention me getting a
Right.
PhD in psychology. You only mentioned the plot twist of you and Matt after we had spoken about the first ones.
Yeah. Narratively, a good plot twist is not as compelling, I guess. Like if it's just almost like the happy families are all the same. I don't know.
Mm. We want to see the rise from the ashes. We want to see the recovery story. Actually, I have a book club with a bunch of other therapists, psychologists, and counselors. And we often read memoirs of people who have quite interesting and complex and difficult lives. And I remember after reading one in particular that the person who was writing the memoir obviously had not completely resolved or made sense of themselves
Oh,
or their experience. And there was a real dissatisfaction reaching the end of that book. Me, as a therapist, knowing it's completely normal and natural, sometimes we make sense of things, sometimes we don't. There shouldn't be any pressure for her to do so. But as a reader, I was like,
right.
no, I didn't get a payoff there.
Oh, yeah.
And that's really, I think, what we long for in others. And when we see other people in our lives that we love and we trust and we know are destined for good things, we're not that. I think we can be empathetic and supportive when they go through something difficult, but we kind of know they're going to be okay. At the end of the day, they'll get back on their feet and they'll manage and they'll sort things out. Whereas from our own perspective, I don't know whether we're that sure at the time whether it's all going to work out fine.
Well, it's interesting that we're kind of imposing, and I love it, this narrative plot itself as a device, because I think part of what the torture of when the plot twisted for me in an unpleasant or into uncertainty, into unknown, um, part of it is I think I was afraid my life would not add up to anything. My life wouldn't make a compelling story. Or wouldn't have a logical flow to it or whatever. I don't know if that would have put it in those terms, but I also felt like where it stood, I felt so invalidated and I couldn't prove something. Like a character reveals who they are by their actions. And I had done everything I thought was right. And my character was invalidated by circumstances largely out of my control. And so
Yes.
I thought part of why I didn't want him to be happy was no, 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 no. I have no defense to prove I've loved. If this doesn't work, who am I? Who am I? I'm a character no one's ever going to want to read about. Even though, yeah, like I'm imposing that kind of looking back. But there was something about that going to a social event or to a family gathering. And I come in with no script that anyone can navigate my life. I'm like, no, 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 no. I experienced love. I experienced love. I can't prove it. I don't have the narrative elements to prove that.
Or the evidence that I suppose definitely Western, sort of American, Australia culture would associate as a successful love project, which must equal a partner who is your long-term partner who's still committed.
Right. Right, right, right. There's something about longevity built into that expectation. If it was the shorter, the less valid or real. It's a assumption that we bring to it. And I think it's an assumption I brought to it.
One of my pet peeves, I think that I haven't made peace with this paradox yet, is the notion that the worst thing that happened to you could then be reframed as the best thing that could have ever happened to you. Do you hear that? I hear people saying that a lot. They'll speak about a really difficult experience of a diagnosis or a marriage breakdown or the death of someone close to them. And they will speak to the trauma and sorrow and grief and loss and difficulty of that moment. But in retrospect, and it's always
Hmm.
in retrospect, they'll
Always.
say, my life was transformed when that happened for the better. Now, that's great. I'm all for that. But the only thing that makes me angry about that notion is that it almost implies that, especially say in my instance of a marriage ending, that I didn't get to make the choice of that happening.
Right.
It's like someone can do something that you think is horrible, and yet do they get to lay claim to the fact that if you go on and evolve and thrive, that it was due to their actions?
Oh yeah, I know. I feel like, so you're saying, in order for me to look back and value this painful period in my life, I need to be the agent of that. Like, I need to be the one who has made the choices that led to those consequences. If someone else is behaving in a way that pulls the rug out from under for me, I don't know if that's the kind of, this is where this kind of crap bubbles up for me. But on my most recent mindfulness retreat in silence for days, I had these moments of people in my life percolating up into my imagination that harmed me in psychological ways, disloyalty or rejection or whatever. And it's the kind of thing where you get some time to, like, oh, well, this bubbled up. I'm going to sit with this. And part of everything that's ended up being valuable to me in my life would not have happened if those friends had been, if the boss had been a good boss, if the friend had been a really good friend, if the person, I have specific people in mind, and I notice almost like an internal barometer. Sometimes I really want revenge, or I want them to know what they did, or I want to rub their face in it, you know? And sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you derailed my life because what came after.
Mm.
But that
I,
sounds like an intellectual exercise, but I think that I feel that at times, not always, at times I feel that viscerally. And I think so. If I think about like the difficult times when my daughter was a teenager, it's a similar thing. It was it's viscerally valuable to have gone through that because it made, how do I, it hurt so bad at the time, but then it almost becomes a defining chapter that we got through that difficult thing. I don't know if it works the same way if the story, if the plot twist is I'm the victim of someone else's actions.
I think that it does. And I think that just listening to you say it makes me feel like I didn't thrive because of what you did, but in spite of it.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so it could be their actions, it could be an accident, it could be whatever. I think that what makes us feel healed and whole and in a position to thrive is recognizing how we moved through it. And we could have moved through it crying and puking and on our hands and knees crawling through the dirt, suffering the entire time.
Wait, you saw me?
Me
I didn't
too.
realize.
I was there too. Dirt stains on knees and everything. But, it's not about the glamour and glitz or, we've spoke about being emotionally eloquent. It's maybe not necessarily the eloquence by which we experience our emotions through these really difficult, brutal, sometimes unexpected plot twists that change the directions of our lives. But it's our ability to have endured and how that has potentially expanded us and even given us an experience of
Mm,
the depths of ourselves. So, not just in ways that show us that we are resilient and strong, but also in ways that show us quite how deep the sorrow and the loss and the regret and the shame can go. But we've seen
hmm.
it. and we've lived through it.
I feel like I've brought this up and I want to try to connect the dots on it. I think I've brought this up to you that when my daughter was a baby, I remember discovering it's like, oh, I'm being initiated into something I didn't know. I had some vague knowledge of, but I'm comforting a crying baby and I don't know what the hell I'm doing, right? And I thought, oh no, I've just been initiated into a tribe that no one tells you about, no one invites you to. You find yourself in it. And yet, I remember thinking, even at the time, way before mindfulness, that I was connected to something very deep and human and ancient, and that there's nobody who's comforted a baby that knew what the hell they were doing. Nobody knew. Nobody knew. So then it's like, oh, what made me think I get an exemption from the hard things? I always said I wanted to raise a child, and this is what it's like. But oh no, no, I want the exemptions from all all the difficult times. And there's something similar when the rug gets pulled out from under you. It's interesting because your marriage, it seemed like someone else pulled the rug. I pulled the rug out from under myself. But in this similar way, we're both left with I cannot picture what comes next. What have I done? What have you done? What have we done? What kind of a movie even is this? You know, right? And then that is so terrifying. And then and I think what I think happens is it doesn't always end well from there. Because we could say no. No, no. I refuse to feel. I refuse to move on. I'm going to numb. I'm going to blame. And I think it's a very popular way to go. And you can get a lot of reinforcement for that. But if you decide, I'm going to crawl on my knees through this shit to see what's on the other side, the crawling reveals, I think, who you are and what you care about, I think. But man, is it so destabilizing to not know and not have a script and not have it in it. And there's something also in those moments where I feel like something has turned its back on me that I didn't expect and I don't deserve. I didn't see coming, where something about I feel unlovable. I feel unlovable. And until this story is done, if I die now, I die like incomplete or unlovable. And it's terrifying. It's alone. I remember feeling so alone and misunderstood. But who's the person? I wish I could rattle this off. Who said that life can only be understood backwards, but has to be lived forward? Doesn't that ring a bell? Maybe
Yeah, that's
Kierkegaard?
yeah, Kierkegaard or Wittgenstein or one of the
Some wise person who probably was never in a relationship, but
there's also an interesting social science study where they asked people about who had lived the most successful life. Anyway, I can't remember quite the language, but they showed two examples of a person who was quite young who shot up to success, and James Dean
uh,
style was, really successful and hitting all these goals and then died then,
mm,
or a person who had had a short run of success and then their life kind of petered out, or maybe their career petered out from there and they died older, many years later. And most people said that the successful life was the one that ended. And yet
right,
there
right.
must be an intuition for this. Like you said, if my story gets cut off here, my mum actually, I remember telling me some sort of story fable about two people who two twins who did something horrible at the same time, and one of them died right after doing it, but the other person
Oh,
went on this redemptive story arc. And it was the idea of if both of them could make it into heaven. Well, one of them who didn't get to have that redemption story arc, nah, he's exempt from heaven, but the other one could. And the fact that one of them was dead and the other one lived was just a fluke of chance. So how
right.
is it that someone's whole afterlife can be dependent on them hanging around to live through their plot twist?
Well, I think so much of what we're circling around in this conversation is this shared human experience looks and feels nothing like what we see in reality shows and popular TV and movies and things that's so tidy. And there's this invisible part that is so deeply human. And it's like, how many people have died feeling they never figured out how to have relationships? They never felt that they were loved or lovable or something, never got a chance to do that. There's so many aspects of life that we think, okay, this is the thing I need to do for my life to have had meaning. And you can be in the middle of that project and it you don't get to find out. So I just find that there's something very makes me feel makes empathy or compassion like it's so hard to be a person. It is so hard to be a person, especially when the rug is pulled out from under us and we're given so few clues it seems in how to navigate those stages or partly because there is no guarantee of it and partly because the wisdom that you most need to hear. I don't know that it's almost like you could only appreciate the wisdom by living through it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like if someone said, I don't tell me everything was going to be okay. Or don't even tell me now you can craft the next chapter of your life. Don't tell me any of that. I don't want that. That's not the thing. Those aren't the things I want. Those aren't the things I want.
That was exactly what Derek said to Meredith in the episode of Grey's Anatomy that I watched the other day. She's really angry and she's like, don't tell us things are going to be okay because you don't know that. And he's
You
like, fair
don't
enough.
know.
He's like, things are going to be however they're going to be. And there's something that's more
Yep.
reassuring about the second statement for me because
Yep.
don't bullshit me. You don't know.
Don't bullshit me. Right.
And you can have a deep faith that I will be okay, but right now I'm not there with you. And hopefully, mentally, cognitively, I can see how I'll get there. But right now in my body, I don't feel like I'm there. So
Right.
I just,
And it doesn't feel inspiring to be told something that's not true. That's about managing the person's feelings who's saying that to you, I think, saying those things to us. Because the reality is, part of what the stakes are so high is you have to find that out by doing it. I do think, though, there's a high probability that when we decide, okay, I'm just going to take the next step, that next step and that next step and that next step end up being the thing that
Mhm.
people report later saying, oh my God. And I sometimes I think, oh my God, I love my life because of what happened after I thought it was all over.
I love this conversation because for people who get quite anxious and are prone to catastrophizing thoughts, one thing that we are very good at doing is jumping to the worst case scenario and fast forwarding straight to the point where the worst could happen. And that happened to me, when I thought, oh, imagine if I could never sing again, or imagine if my husband leaves. And those things fill you with this flood of fear, of nervousness.
Yep.
And when I've done work on this with my therapist, and she goes, and then what? Your husband leaves, and then what? And you're like, what do you mean? I remember talking to her when I had a lot of anxiety with a little baby and being like, and what if I, wake up and I go in there and he's dead? And she's like, yeah, and then what? And I was like, well,
Hmm.
how? I just collapse on the floor. Like, she goes, like, oh, what would you do then after? She's like, when you need to get up to the toilet? What? But yet we freeze frame in that moment of
Hmm.
tragedy or extreme change, and it's almost like we're frozen in place. And even when you've lived through it, I'm sure that we've all had that experience where yes, it does
Hmm.
feel like life just stops. And
Hmm.
then what? And then you go
Right.
on, you take the next step, and it doesn't look like how you think it might look. It doesn't feel like how it might feel. So, for any listeners out there who are mid plot twist or maybe still trying to make sense of moments in their life where things have been upended or changed, there is some hope, and not in this big, fluffy, grand, extravagant way, but merely just in the and then what question, where we recognize that we take one step and then we take another step and then we take another step, maybe down a path that we don't know what's at the end of yet.
And I think it's okay to not feel okay about it. I think it's okay to not feel okay. I think that it could be by just noticing this is what it feels like to have no idea what comes next. And I am afraid I am not up to this. That's to me is not problematic. That is deeply, deeply human to wonder. And then it is interesting. And then get something to eat, go to the bathroom, go to bed, cry, read a book, stop reading that book, find another. It's like, and then there's something about this. I feel like maybe we're talking also about the ego does not like this at all. The ego that feels like at the center of the universe. Do you know who I am? This can't be happening. I'm not supposed, this isn't what my life is supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but actually realizing that you don't get an exemption from what makes life hard, and it's okay to not accept that cognitively or intellectually. It's okay to reject that, but keep living, and then come back and decide later. Don't be so quick to write the conclusion of that book that you, or that story that you fear is hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
Well, people throughout time have turned to have discovered their creativity or contributed to the arts by what they do in that very spot. Not everybody, but I think that's where art comes from. People are like, "Oh my gosh, I don't get an exemption from this, but it hurts." Next thing you know, you have an opera. Or maybe that makes it sound easier than it is, but you know what I mean. Then something, a message in a bottle gets put out into the world that comforts us when we find ourselves in that spot.
And I would also issue a word of warning as to what types of core beliefs we are chewing into and
Uh,
absorbing too strongly at the time of these plot twists or these major changes. Like you said, I am unlovable, I am unworthy, I am incompetent, I am broken. Those things that we
mhm.
suddenly think this is what that must mean is when we have those moments that we just feel like are straight up failures. When we're
Right,
very close to something not working out, of course it feels like a bloody failure. Of course
right,
it's going to feel that way. And of course it's natural for our mind to want to make sense of why that happened and take ownership or responsibility in a way. Oh, that must be because I'm unlovable. Oh,
right,
that must be because I'm incompetent or unworthy. There we are trying
right.
to steal
Exactly.
away some control from that plot twist. And it's hugely normal and natural, a human reaction. But if we absorb that too much for too long, we never have anyone or anything to shake us out of that
Right.
new truth that we might be trying on for size, then it can become a part of how we see ourselves and how we subsequently move through the world.
And it's so dangerous to buy into those stories, and you have to reach out. You have to reach out whether you want to or not reach out. But you're reminding me that every tool that I've ever learned about how to deal with emotions, it did not come from the 10 years I worked in mental health field. It came in after I do not know what's going to happen next. And I crawled naively into a yoga class that ended up being really a mindfulness class in disguise that led to this, that led to that, that led to this. And next thing you know, very wise people are giving me tools so that I could discover that as long as I'm waiting for the world to validate me, I'm kind of screwed. I'm going to have to work on a project in here that I didn't want to do, which is a relationship with myself. And I wouldn't have had any of those lessons without the desperation and realizing I'm not equipped for this. And it came from wise people and me rejecting them again and again until I decided to try. It's
Mhm.
ultimately you kind of just have to try. So, oh, wow, what an interesting. I didn't know where just the idea of a plot twist would take us. It feels like we're part of this messy experience of being vulnerable humans. But I like this idea of broadcasting to people sincerely. Don't just stop there with your fears validated. Find a way to, even if it's a tiny, tiny step away from that when you can,
A tiny step in spite of it,
in spite of
because
it.
the worst things have happened to too many people, and people remarkably go on.
I think resilience can be go to the bathroom when you feel like life's not worth living and then make a salad and cry into it.
Watch an episode of your favorite show. It doesn't need
Yeah.
to look like we think it's supposed to look. When I hear the word resilience, I see shields and armor and swords and some sort of really grand, lofty exercise. And the past year of my life has taught me that it actually looks pretty messy and grubby and soggy.
What make, if I look back, so here's my tip for people. When I look back, wanting resolution made it worse. And deciding to forego knowing how it would end made it livable. Not pleasant, but I could live with, I have no idea where this could lead. I'm just taking this step. And I think you have to really concentrate on the next, like one day at a time is way too long at some of those phases. Like 1 hour, 1 minute, one step, one meal is plenty. That's where you discover resilience is in how far you can scale down. But if there's any way at all, even to temporarily put aside knowing how it ends, I think it's helpful.
We
It's
could,
hard.
it's hard. The line of existential courage that we might be forced to take throughout our life. Thank you, Darren. This has been a really enlightening and heartwarming convo, actually.
Yeah, I felt close. All right. Next time. See you soon.